Hi, my name is Etta Grace, and welcome back to my YouTube channel. Today, I am thrilled to be joined by Emma Hill, who is the author of And Maybe They Fall in Love. So thank you for joining me today.
Yes, I'm happy to be here.
So first, do you mind telling me a bit about yourself and what you write?
Yeah, so my name is Emma Hill. I am a writer and I have been a writer my whole life. I've been writing since I was a kid. I'm based in Texas. I went and got a creative writing degree and then I started teaching sixth graders English. So that's what I'm doing now. I'm a sixth grade English teacher and I started writing and Maybe They Fall in Love in 2020. It is a contemporary fantasy romance with mental health representation following two interns who are trying to figure out their lives and the world around them. And one of them has a lot going on in her head, and maybe they fall in love, maybe they don't. I guess you'll have to read it to find out. I mean, you
That's such
have
a
read
great pitch. Yes, I have read it, and it was wonderful. By the time this video goes up, the review will already be up, so I'll put links to that. But yeah, you mentioned that started writing it during 2020 when the world ended. I was a college student at the time, so reading a book set in a post-COVID world was very interesting for me, and I liked it a lot. So, how did your quarantine experiences influence the story, and how you went through those, and what carried into the fiction and the contemporary fantasy?
So it was definitely a challenge, and it was definitely, I don't really know, I don't remember why I chose to do that originally, but it worked out really well as Elle developed as a character because it was so fun to think of mind reading in a world gone virtual. Because as you know from reading the story, her mind reading can't travel through like a Zoom call, right? And so she could hide herself a lot easier in the COVID world. So she could hide herself a lot easier with quarantine. But I really, as I was writing, I challenged myself to not ever mention the words COVID or like, I don't think I even mentioned the word quarantine or anything like that. Like, I tried not to bring those things up because I wanted it to be subtle, where it's like, if you know, you know. But like, if this, if we go on and like years and years from now, if somebody's picking it up, then they can read it and be like, oh, I guess something was happening. But, it's not super in your face. Like, this is all about COVID. It was just kind of an element that further isolated Elle. And so I really wanted to kind of explore that as far as like the mind reading goes, which was really, really fun. And I also just really wanted to just highlight how ridiculous businesses got whenever everything kind of went virtual. Like, just they got away with so much. Like, I mean,
Yes.
I was a college student too. So like colleges included literally got away with so much while this was happening. So as you know, like Grumbly Muffin Studios is the place where they go to intern. And I just thinking of increasingly ridiculous excuses for them to not meet in person was just like such a fun side quest for me. So that was really, really fun.
I had a question that I originally struck from the list because I came up with a better question, but it was like, what's up with Grumbly Muffin Studios? Like, is there an ulterior motivation going on, or was it just like that? And I'm glad you confirmed it was just like that, because I remember I was like, for a lot of people, the world like screeched to a halt, but for a lot of other people, like you just had to carry on and figure out how to make do with the new restrictions. And so I
Right.
remember I was working a job as an IT consultant, and I left the workplace where I was pulling cable through ceilings to go take Zoom class at a Starbucks because that was the only place that had free Wi-Fi nearby. And they wouldn't let me sit inside to take my Zoom class. So I just pulled my car forward, like into the handicap space, because that's as close to the building as I could get to get the free Wi-Fi and join my Zoom class and give my presentation before pulling out of the parking lot and going right back to work. And
Yes.
that's my like uphill in the snow both ways moment for my little siblings, where it's like your college experience wasn't this bad. So I
Yes.
think it's very funny reading those with Elle and Christopher and being interns and trying to like work a job where you cannot talk to your employer. It was very much a yes, I feel seen by this so much.
Yes. Yes. And I really wanted it to be that, where it was kind of like, yes, there were serious things that happened during, the quarantine and all of that, but there were also really goofy things that happened like this. And
Yeah,
I
now
just
it's done. We
feel
can
like,
make light of
yeah,
it.
because it's like, what other situation would we be in where a place could get away with this much nonsense? And it's like, this is proving the fact that like if you give somebody an inch, they're gonna go a mile with it just to see like how far we can go for, just the craziness of a business. Um, just yeah, taking advantage of that. So I love that with Grumbly Muffin Studios. Also, their name was a typo. So I involved my Instagram followers a lot with the naming of different places. Whenever I first started writing, and maybe they fall in love, because it started as a serial in my newsletter, and then after it kind of like picked up traction, I took it off and I developed it into a whole novel. But a friend of mine was trying to say Crumbly Muffin Studios, and they said Grumbly instead, and I was like, yes, this is
That's
it. They're
so
grumbly
funny.
because they're like they're grumpy that they would ever have to be around anybody. So they're just like, there's squirrels in our building, so you can't meet here.
That's so
Sorry.
funny. Yeah, I love that name and I love all the backstory behind that. That's so entertaining to me. But on the more serious side of quarantine and mental health and the other topics of this book, it deals with OCD. The main character, Al, has OCD, and other mental health issues are discussed. So I felt they were discussed in a very sensitive way. And so was there anything that you wanted your readers to take away from the story regarding the process of healing and learning how to live with mental illness in a world that makes that very difficult?
Yes, I think the number one thing, if I could just say one thing to everybody, is that the theme of the book is you are worth the maybes, like kind of playing on that title, but more on a more serious note, like you're really worth the maybes. You're worth the risk of caring for yourself and reaching out for help and talking to a therapist or talking to your friends. Like Elle finally confessing to Christopher, that's a spoiler, but Elle finally, telling him what's going on in her head, like not keeping all that up to where, it's all in her mind and she's so alone with it. It's just finally being able to share that with somebody and saying like, I need help. um that's really the message that I would say, is that you are worth doing that for. You're worth taking that extra step and that risk, even if it's something that's scary to you. Your well-being is worth doing that. And so I think that that would be the main message that I would say. um because while not all of us are, mind readers or anything like that, a lot of us do feel, or at least I've felt a lot of times, like the things that are in my head are not always like the thoughts that are me. It's like kind of that struggle that Elle has with the afterthoughts of like, this isn't really who she is, but all of these intrusive thoughts are coming in and messing things up. Or all of these thoughts that are other people's thoughts are coming in and messing things up. And she has all of this to deal with and all of these factors pulling her back and forth. And to deal with that alone is not something that anybody should have to do. And I think that connecting that to quarantine is really poignant, that you kind of bring that up, and is really important because so many people did struggle with feeling alone whenever we were all locked up inside. And like for Elle, she loved the, Zoom thing where she could not have to read everybody's minds, but for not everybody had that same experience where they loved having that. A lot of people were missing that key element of human interaction, and that had really bad consequences for a lot of people. Um, and it still does for some people who are still struggling through that. And so, yeah, I really hope, and luckily my book has found readers who needed to hear that message, that they are worth taking that extra step. And I've been, so encouraged and so blessed to have people like reach out to me and tell me that my book, made them feel seen. It made them feel like, they weren't alone in this anymore. And, that's, in whatever way I can, that's the message I want to give, is that you're not alone and you're worth taking that step. Sorry, that was really long.
No, you're good. You're good. That's a beautiful message. And that's amazing that some people reached out to you and said that it changed their lives in such a positive way. I mean, that's really what every author wants to hear, but that's beautiful that you were able to make such a positive impact on people's lives with this story. And what we can learn from fiction really does impact everyday life. And another thing that I connected to this was that during quarantine, so many people sought solace and comfort in fictional media as a way to escape from the everyday. And so now fictional media gives us a way to process everything we went through,
Yes.
in
Yes.
addition to being a comforting escape from it. And being able to read a book like this and helping people like that, it's a beautiful thing that you've been able to do with this story. And I'm looking forward to seeing where you go with the rest of the series. And on the topic of spoilers, feel free to share as much or as little as you want. I'm going to leave that up to your discretion.
Okay, well, just so you know, I'm the worst at spoiling things, so I might just spoil everything I have planned for the near future.
Okay.
Just so you know.
I'll put a warning on the video. So
Yes.
spoilers, maybe.
Yes. And maybe there were spoilers.
So I don't remember if this was discussed explicitly on the page, but it's implied that the news that some people can read minds came out over quarantine when people were stuck at home with their families. And so how did Elle's immediate family react to finding out that she was a reader? Did they always know? And was this just breaking national news, or was this news to them? And then Elle was like, oh, wait, that's me. How exactly did that fall out? And did that change how they perceived her?
So I actually love this question because it's not explicitly mentioned on the page, but like I immediately kind of knew, I knew at least how her dad and Erica would have responded. But it's kind of the second option. So Elle always had mind reading. It wasn't something that like developed over time or like suddenly awoke whenever everybody found out about it. It was something that she was born with and she just naturally did. But she didn't realize that that was different than everybody else. She just thought that everybody's minds worked this way. And so whenever the news broke, then she realized like, oh wait, that's me. And so she realized that that's different than everybody else. And so she found out along with her family during this time. Um, and I was thinking about like immediate reactions, and I just know that her dad, oh Greg, he would be so excited. Like he would have freaked out and just like, gone above and beyond, probably gotten her cake. Erica probably also went along with the cake. And then Elle's mom probably just went along with it, like whatever, let's
That's so
just make this
sweet.
a whole thing. So I feel like that would, because Greg is the kind of guy that like goes 110% for his kids. And that's why what happens in the story is so confusing to Elle. Um, I will not spoil anything else, but yes, that's I think what he would have done at that point is just like go above and beyond and say like, Elle, we're so excited. This is so cool. He probably would have asked her to do lots of like mind reading tricks, like, what am I thinking of now? Like, and her mom probably would have gotten very annoyed with that. Yeah, but I love that question because I hadn't thought about like that moment before. And so it was really fun to like explore the characters a little bit more.
That's really cute and really funny. I'm glad that she had the supportive family during all of that to make her feel more at peace with who she was. Because I know she's self-conscious about being a reader. People perceive her differently, but her family doesn't perceive her differently. And Erica is seen, her little sister is seen as like one of her closest friends throughout most of the book. And so it's good to have that background of like, yeah, none of them are weirded out by her being a reader. It's mostly other strangers who don't get to know her and don't know who she really is, who
Yeah.
just guess that it's going to be in the worst possible light. You have these bad actors who just assume these things about her. But her family is there for her, and that's what's important.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely.
So, for on the other side, the other main character is Christopher, and he's a concept artist. So, I was wondering if you have a favorite artist or a particular art style, and if that's reflected as Christopher's favorite artist or art style, or if he draws in a different sort of way than you personally like or imagine.
So I love this question also. Like these were two really, really good questions because um Christopher, he's not really based off of, but he's sort of based off of my husband. So my husband is an artist. He's not a concept artist, but he has studied concept art. And so Christopher's tastes are kind of based on my husband's research into concept art. And so Christopher like is into the golden age of illustration, like Norman Rockwell, all of that. I also mentioned Heinrich Klei a little bit in the book because he inspired Disney. And so Christopher, that's not necessarily like his absolute favorite. I think he's more on the golden age side of things. But he, respects that for the history that's there. So yeah, Christopher's a little nerd because I based him on that aspect of my husband. So
That's super
yeah,
cute. And that's
yeah.
super cool. I don't think I can like put up pictures on the screen. I haven't quite learned how to do that with video editing yet, but if you're curious, now you know to go check that out. I'm
Yeah.
familiar with a couple of those artists. I've started teaching myself art and studying that sort of thing, and so learning about the history is always really cool. So I'm looking forward to checking that out.
Yes, that is awesome. We got to go, a local university museum actually had a Norman Rockwell like exhibition a few months ago, and we got to go and see some of his work, and it was so cool. Like I love that
Mhm.
stuff. I'm very much on the illustration side of things. Like that's my favorite kind of art. Like all of the prints or ink drawings that are in like the classics, the illustrated classics.
Yeah,
Those are
yeah.
my favorite things. I could just gush about those just for days.
It
And
makes me so nostalgic for all of the old books that I like loved to pieces as a kid, where like the pages started falling out because I'd read them so many times, and all of the old illustrations that were my favorite that I showed my little siblings. One of my favorite
yes,
Norman Rockwell pieces is Shiner. If you're familiar with that one, the little girl with like a like bruised eye, like looking
yeah,
super excited and proud of herself on the principal's bench, because it reminds me of my little sister. She's the youngest of 5 of us, and she will pick fights with her older brothers, and it's very cute.
that's
So
amazing.
Norman
That's
Rockwell is one of my favorite artists too.
Yes, I love that. And on the note of illustrations, I know we're going to talk about like what's next in the future, but um how do I say this without spoiling it? I'm just going to spoil it. Okay, for the Kickstarter that will be happening, one of the stretch goals is I found an illustrator who does those illustrations that are like those from the old books. And one of the stretch goals is to provide illustrations for both books because I love them so much.
That's so cool.
I know. I know.
Are they going to be
I'm
like from Christopher's sketchbook, or like sketches of the characters doing the things in the story?
So it'll probably be a mix of both. I really want him to sketch readings. I really want it to be like the readings will be illustrated. Like I
That's
really, really
super
want that.
cool. That's super,
So
super cool. I'm so
yes.
excited for that. That's awesome.
I know. I'm really hoping because it's going to be a stretch goal. So it's like something we have to get to after the Kickstarter funds. But I'm really, really hoping we get there because that's like a dream come true that they would be like illustrated with that style that I love so much.
That would be amazing. I'm so proud of you. That would be such a cool goal. I hope it reaches that, and I'm happy to help promote it in any way because I also want to see those really badly.
Yes, I know. I'm so, so excited.
So I guess my next question is a part of the story where these two characters meet and get to bond over card games. So do you play a lot of card games with your family and friends? And do you have any favorites? And was this inspired by any like personal interactions?
Yes. So my family has always been weirdly into card games. It's something that like we took with us for like school field trips. We have like family game nights, and my dad used to be the Sunday school teacher for a college and career group at our church. And whenever I was younger, and they would all like all the college and career kids would come over to our house, and we would stay up like way too late on Friday nights just playing card games with all of these guys. And I was like, 12 or 13 or something, and I felt so cool because I was getting to play like card games with all these people.
That's
So
super
it
fun.
was super fun. And I think some of our favorites, Spades is a classic, so I had to include that. Slap is also a classic. That's like field trip 101. That's, what you do whenever you have free time on a field trip. And then there was one that we were taught by a Canadian couple while we were on a Texas history field trip. And it's called Snitch. And you can try looking up the rules. We couldn't really find any on the internet. This couple just kind of taught us, and then I don't even know if this game exists like anywhere else. But it was really, really fun. And yeah, we love to play card games. That's about the extent of it though. Spades and slap and snitch and poker. Those are the ones that we play a lot.
That's a lot of fun. My family does the same thing of playing card games, but it's really cool that you had that experience having all the college and career kids come over to your house and being able to play with such a large group. Like I said, I'm one of 5, so we have a fairly big table with just my immediate family. And we play a lot of like traditional card games like Hearts,
Yeah.
but also Uno Attack. Uno
Mm,
Attack. It's brutal.
yeah.
So
No,
um
we had to stop playing. There was one, it's discontinued now. There's a game called Looters, and it's
I
like
don't think I've
it's a
ever
really
heard of
fun
that.
it's a really fun game, but it's discontinued. Like you can't buy it anywhere except for like maybe eBay. You can buy like a used version. But we had to stop playing because we would get into fights, and we can't play Monopoly anymore because we're all so competitive.
Monopoly is so bad.
It's so aggressive. Yeah. No,
Yeah,
but
but I thought
the
that
card
was such. Sorry, go ahead.
I was just gonna say the card games are like they're fast paced enough that like if you lose, you can just be like, oh, I got the next round. It'll be fine. So it's okay for competitive people to play because you don't get too sucked into it.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. It was just one of those things that as I was reading, as a writer, I like to put little bits of myself into the story, not in like super huge ways, but like it's just like an Easter egg there for my family or friends or people who know me.
Yes.
And so as I was reading that, I was like, that sounds familiar. And so I'm really glad to hear like all the background to that, and that you got to share those cool experiences and then give that thing that you love to your characters too. Hearing people talk about what they're passionate about and how that works into their fiction and storytelling is always really fun for me.
Yes, absolutely. And that was, I mean, a lot of things in And Maybe They Fall in Love were things that I pulled from my experiences or from people that I care about around me, because it was a labor of love and it was fun. So
Mhm.
yes, it was really cool to get to bring all that together.
Yeah. So the book shares a POV between Christopher and Elle. And so did you find one of them easier to write, or do you have a favorite scene from either of their POVs?
So I like this question. I wrote them down, but Elle, as far as the point of views, I'll just start with that one first. Like, which one was my favorite? Elle was probably easier to write because she had more conflict going on, and her conflict was not completely pulled from my experience, but her intrusive thoughts and all that sort of thing were pulled from my experience. I was very much writing through that as I was experiencing it. Um, and so Elle was a lot easier to write for me because her conflict came to me so naturally. Christopher, I loved writing because he's a goofball and a cinnamon roll, and we love him. But he, especially towards the end, it was harder for me because his conflict was able to resolve itself, and then, I was writing him more as he was a support for Elle as she was figuring out her conflict that was taking a little bit longer. And her conflict isn't even really completely resolved at the end, right? Like, it's still kind of open-ended. Like, this isn't some magic fix for mental health, which is another thing I really wanted to avoid. It's more just that she's taking that step forward and she's telling herself like she's worth the maybes. And so I really liked writing Elle. I think she was my favorite to write. As far as the scenes, I wrote them down. Let me get to them. Um, so my favorite Christopher scene, I had a favorite Christopher scene and then I had a favorite Christopher quote. So my favorite Christopher scene is probably the cup scene because it's so emotional and it's so like just finally he just sees that something is actually really wrong and he's there for her in an instant. And I just love doing that.
That's my
Um,
favorite too.
Yay, I'm glad. That's actually what, if you see, there's art that I got commissioned whenever the book released this February, and it's them just hugging and it's got like roses around them and everything. That was based on that scene. So it's him just holding her. And it's actually going to be available as, I think, a print question mark and then also a sticker for the Kickstarter. So, but it's based on that scene because I just love that scene so much. Um, and then Christopher, the quote that I love about Christopher, so many quotes I love about Christopher, but my favorite one that sticks in my head just constantly is where he's going like from 50%, like at least 50% of him wanted to ask Elle out, or at least 50% of him thought that she was cool. And then he goes 100% of Christopher wanted to find a non-weird, totally casual way to ask Elle out. Like, that just makes
That's
me
very
so happy
funny.
because he's just like, he's trying to avoid it because he's like, I can't do this. She's gonna find out my secrets. She's a reader. Readers can't be trusted. And then he's like, okay, I can't take it anymore. 100% of me wants to do this.
Yeah,
So
finally admitting to himself that he likes
yes,
her.
yes. And then my favorite Elle scene, I thought about this a lot because I could say all of the afterthought scenes because they were so meaningful to me and I love getting to give that representation to readers. And while those are definitely really, really important to me, I think my favorite scenes with Elle are the ones with her and Tally because I know what their relationship is going to look like once he grows up a little bit. And I'm just so excited for that. I've already kind of written that to some extent for future books that are going to be happening. Um, but just the fact that she gets to be a part of Tally's life and the fact that like that's a healing moment for her, especially at the very end, whenever she's getting to hold him and like see his readings and everything. That's just I just love that for her so much. I love that she gets
Hmm.
that like piece of like being a part of his life. Um, and I love too that there's still a little bit of conflict there, um, because of reasons that I will not say anymore because spoilers, but I just love that she gets to be a part of Tally's life. So, yeah, I think those are my favorite Elle scenes, or those were my favorite ones to write.
Yeah, that's really sweet. And what you said about like the different conflicts and how they get resolved is that Elle has both external and internal conflict in that like there's family drama and then the afterthoughts. And that's all coming together in like one big mess in her head. Christopher has a little bit of internal conflict in like the do I do animation or art, concept art, or like find a real job. But most of his conflict is the external family drama.
Right.
Like he's got the internship. He's making it work for the most part. Like the internal drama takes a side seat to that external drama.
Yeah.
And so
Absolutely.
it makes sense seeing that reflected through their character arcs that like once his conflict's able to be resolved, he can help the one that still has conflict. And so
Yeah.
I thought it was balanced very well. Through their POVs, one didn't feel like the main character and then the love interest. They felt like co-protagonists. And so that's a lot of fun that you were able to pick out those different scenes, and that your favorite from Els wasn't just her struggles, but her peace as well, that
Yeah.
she finally gets a break. And I'm excited to see where you go with Tally in the future. I'm excited to see how that all comes together, foreshadowing.
Yes. I will try not to say anything, but I was working on Tally related shenanigans earlier today. So
it's on the
that,
mind. That makes
yes,
sense.
it is on the mind. Yes.
Cool. So Christopher and Elle both go to Boston for this internship. So how did you pick Boston as a city setting? You said that they're both from Texas and you're from Texas. So why did you have them go to Boston and not keep them in Texas for the setting? And when you're writing contemporary fiction, do you find yourself going down rabbit holes of like making sure geography and place names are right? Like I'm a high fantasy writer, and I go down completely different rabbit holes about like medieval weaponry in the 14th century, like
Right.
Italian peninsula. But how do your rabbit holes look like for research, and how do you write contemporary fiction? Because getting place names wrong is the one thing keeping me from doing contemporary fiction.
So honestly, same. I grew up writing sci-fi and fantasy. I was like, contemporary takes too much research. Historical definitely takes way too much research. But that was another reason why I chose to do it during COVID times, because they didn't have to leave too much. It was the
That
doodle
makes a
house and
lot
it
of
was the
sense.
apartment. It
Yeah.
was really just not a whole lot was happening. Yeah, so I have done a lot more research, absolutely, but I did not research Boston any more than I wanted to, because like I said, it was a labor of love to write this book, and it was not something that like I didn't want to make it not fun for me by bogging myself down with what streets are they on, what street is the Doodle House on, because it's a big city. So I figured we could just let the mind imagine it and we would be fine. But I chose Boston to not keep them in Texas and take them to Boston instead, because I really wanted to give both Elle and Christopher a physical way to separate from their problems and sort them out before coming back home. I mean, we all know the hero's journey of like, there's your ordinary life, and then all of a sudden you go into the upside down, like that kind of thing, and then you come back. Like
That
that's
makes
just,
so much sense. I've never heard that applied to contemporary, but that makes so much sense now that you say it.
I mean, that's the same reason why like the small town girl goes to the big city, or the big city girl goes to the small town.
Yeah,
Like,
yeah.
just taking that physical movement, and it doesn't always have to be physical, but I wanted it to be for them, because I am going to slowly shift this series into more fantasy and less romance. It will still be contemporary, but a little bit more on the adventure side of things. I wanted to go ahead and have that cycle sort of set up for my readers so that they can expect that. And Boston just seems like such a fun, romantic little town. Not little town, giant city. But it seems like a fun, romantic location and a good place for adventure to happen. And I just thought that that would be really fun to have them there. I didn't want it to be New York, because then I would absolutely have to do way too much research, because everybody's hyper fixated on New York for some reason. So I just was like, you know what? We're going to do Boston, because it feels like the sort of place where Elle could get her life sorted out. And also, it's probably not going to be super active during quarantine, because so many places are going to be shut down.
Yeah, the quarantine way of getting around that is actually a stroke of genius. I don't know if you've ever read the novelization version of The Princess Bride, but there's a part, the framing sequence of that is that every time the author doesn't want to write a scene, he's like, this is an abridgment of an older novel, and this was a boring bit, so I cut it out. And so he just writes in italics, I cut out this scene, on to the next fun part, and then jumps ahead. And so it feels kind of like that, where you're like utilizing a loophole in like the plot itself to make things easier on yourself. And that's
Yes,
genius. I love that.
absolutely. Was it me being lazy a little bit, but also it was me
Work
wanting to
smarter, not
focus more
harder,
on
you
them.
know?
Exactly. Yeah. Like, we're focused on Elle here. Nobody cares what street the Doodle House is on. So
Yeah, and I think contemporary, and I guess this is a contemporary fantasy, but it especially thrives on like it's character driven. That's the appeal of the drama. The genre is that it's character driven. And
yes,
so if you wanted world building, you'd go read epic fantasy, but you're here for the character drama. And so I
absolutely.
think it works really well in the context of the story.
Yay, I'm glad. I hope everybody who's watching this is not like, wow, I'm from Boston and I find that very offensive.
I am
But
not from Boston, so I
so
can't
we're
speak
good.
for them. But my
Yes.
last question is just kind of a freebie. Is there anything else that you wanted to mention that I haven't asked you yet, or that the conversation hasn't meandered around to that you just are really excited about and want to tell us?
So I'm using this as a chance to talk about what's happening this Friday. I don't know if it probably will not be this Friday by the time that the video goes up, but this Friday I am revealing the new cover for And Maybe They Fall in Love. And I am so excited about that. So I'm taking this to be that question of why a new cover. Just because I really want to talk about it, if that's
Yeah, of
okay.
course.
Okay, cool. So I originally, whenever I was writing it, like I said, it started out as a serial and it was a challenge to myself to see if I could write contemporary romance because I'd never written a romantic story where they ended up together at the end. Like it always ended tragically, or it was super toxic, or like something terrible was happening, or it was a horror story that I was writing for an anthology. Like just it never ended well in the romance that I'd written before. And so I was like, you know what? I just got married. I probably need to write some romance that ends happily ever after, or people are going to start asking questions. So that was kind of where this came from. And so because of that, I connected to the romance community on Instagram. I focused on romance. Um I commissioned a romance artist to do the illustration for the cover design, and that was kind of my focus for a really long time was the romance element. And as Elle showed up and as I got to know her, because I am very much a pantser, as the story developed and kind of went beyond what I was expecting it to be, I realized that there was a lot more fantasy in this world and it was something I wanted to explore. And so, because of that, the cover, the way it is right now, doesn't really fit how I see this story anymore. It's still a great cover, but it's just not a cover for a book that's a part of a larger contemporary fantasy structure. And so because I want to make sure that my books are cohesive and that thematic consistency is there throughout, even though book two is very different than book one, I decided to go with a new cover designer who has done fantasy and she's done romantasy before, and she's also done contemporary romance. And so we took those two things that she's done separately and we combined them into a cover that I am just so happy with, that just has so many fun elements for the book. And so I'm really excited to reveal that. And it's going to relate to book two's cover as well. She's also doing book two's cover. And so just having that all together just makes me really, really happy.
That's
So
super cool.
yeah.
I love it when covers tie together in a series. It's so satisfying.
Yes, yes. There's it's gonna be like whenever you set them up right next to each other, then it's like it's a continuum. So
Mhm.
I'm very, very excited for it.
Yeah, people they say don't judge a book by its cover, and I think you should hold by that is don't judge a book by its cover. But at the same time, this is Instagram. People absolutely judge books by their cover. It's your number one marketing tool. So it's worth it to make sure that it's something that you can be proud of and something that represents the book well. And
Absolutely.
that's really cool. So I'm very excited to see that. I think I'm part of that like release spreading the word. So that'll go up either in time with this video or in time with the review. You can pick which one.
Okay,
Um,
awesome.
but yeah, I'm very excited to see that and to see how the rest of the book evolves. This isn't a question on the list, but it's a question I just thought of. You said that this started as an anthology for your newsletter. So at what point did it switch from an anthology of book one that you wanted to turn into a cohesive book to, oh, this is a multi-book series with an overarching plot and continuing characters and setup and foreshadowing and matching covers? At what point did that transition happen? Was it always a multi-book anthology, or did it happen at some point during the switch?
So it was not a multi-book universe. I've toyed with the name the Maybeverse. I don't know. But it was entirely my beta reader's fault. So you can thank Lily for that. Um I so I rewrote And Maybe They Fall in Love 5 times. And so for the first few times, the character of Caroline was like 3 or 4 different people who kind of had like similar character traits, but they were all serving different functions. And it was just too much. I was like, this is just way too much, basically the same character over and over, but in different functions. And so I rewrote it and I got Caroline, and her character development needed some help. And so my beta reader pointed that out and she was like, you could do this, this, and this with Caroline. And I was like, oh, you're so right. And then I realized, oh, wait, Caroline has a story. She and Tyler have a story. This could be something. And so that turned into their story. And then I found the end of And Maybe They Fall in Love, and I was like, oh, there's gonna be a young adult fantasy trilogy or series or something, because this needs to be explained in the future whenever he's not a baby. So yeah, that the characters just surprised me, but you can blame book 2 for sure. You can blame It Would Have Been a Great Story entirely entirely on my beta reader.
I have the same experience. I had a couple beta readers read it's going to be my debut book, but it's called Runaways. It's a middle grade fantasy series about a girl going to rescue her sister from the Fae. And after draft 2, they were all like, there's so much lore here, and you don't give us explanations for any of it. And we want to see more drama between these 2 sisters instead of montaging through this week-long training sequence. And so now I've added 50,000 words to this book for draft 3.
Yes,
and I'm like,
yes.
what am I doing here? So I was like, oh, I'm gonna publish Runaways in fall 2024. It's not gonna happen. There's 50,000 more words in this thing now, and you can thank Katie and Arva for that.
I know. I love it whenever the stories, like, because they see the things that we miss, right? Like, we've gone
and
over
it's
this so
going
many
to be
times.
a better story because of it. It's going to be a more fleshed out world, and I'm having so much more fun with it now. But it's so much more work.
but there's so much more work. Yes. Oh, I feel that so much, because yeah, like rewriting Caroline for the 70,000th time, and then Maybe They Fall in Love was like, ah, but it led to It Would Have Been a Great Story, which I love so much now. I didn't love it for such a long time, but after revising and editing over and over and over again, now like Caroline and Tyler are my babies. I'm just so excited to share them. They're going to be amazing.
I feel that, because I've also considered like writing I've written a couple like side short stories for my side characters, and it hasn't turned into whole novels yet, but it's about to. So this is a bit of an inspiration for me, knowing that like on draft 3, there's still more this could go to, since you have 5 drafts under your belt. But
Oh,
absolutely, be patient with myself here.
Yes, and give yourself breaks. Like, that's my number one like writing tip, and it's something that my professor told me to do. Like, between each draft, give yourself an ample amount of time to just set it aside, do something else, don't write, whatever you need to do to just forget the book, and then you go back to it anew. And then you're able to see it with fresh eyes and see things that you missed, especially if you get it in like a different format. That can help a lot. And so I had to do that a lot with this book. I printed it out. I read it on Google Docs. I read it on Kindle. I mean, I just tried as many formats as I could just to try and work through all of the different things that I was missing. And hopefully it worked out. I mean, hopefully it played out.
That's great advice. I'm sure you're a great English teacher with your wealth of information. So
I hope so.
Thank you again for talking to me. My last question is just, what's your next project? You've talked a little bit about teasers for Kickstarters and other books. So where can we find those projects, and where can we find you and your work online?
Yes. So my next book that is publishing is It Would Have Been a Great Story, and that is publishing sometime mid 2024. But it will be available for you to buy through the Kickstarter, which is running January 2nd, 2024. Kickstarter is a crowdfunding platform. It's not a fundraiser, it's a crowdfunding platform that allows authors to provide really cool exclusive editions to readers without having to spend a whole bunch of money on them. So we basically offer all of these cool things that we're going to make, and then you say, yes, I would like that. And then we fulfill that for you, and everybody goes home happy. So I'm going to be offering for the first time ever hardcovers of my books. So I will have paperbacks, I will have hardcovers, I will have annotated versions, I will have signed copies, I will have, as we talked about, stretch goals that involve illustrations. I will have all of these cool things that will be available through the Kickstarter. And so that's really the big next thing. That's my big next project. It Would Have Been a Great Story is done as far as writing goes. It's been sent to my editor, who got it a week ago, I think, and he's going to get it back to me sometime in November. And after that, I'll start doing formatting and everything. But the story is done. The only thing that's really left is just fine tuning and then getting it into a book. So yeah, the next big thing is the Kickstarter, and you can find that if you search the Maybe Duology on Kickstarter, then that will pop up. And as of Friday, there will be a new cover that will be on that little graphic, that little banner that's there. But for now, it's just like a blank placeholder thing. So yeah, the Maybe Duology, and then I'm most active on eHill Author on Instagram. So that's really a big place where you can find me, is Instagram and then that Kickstarter. And I also have a newsletter, but you can get to that through eHill Author. But I can also send you the link if you want to put it in the caption as well for the YouTube.
Perfect. Thank you so much.
Of course.